Good morning, everybody. Campbell McCrary here again. Amvest Capital, New York City, Vice President of Capital Markets. We have with us today Silver Viper Minerals Corp. Silver Viper trades on the venture as Viper, VIPR, and on the OTCQB as VIPRF, it's a Foxtrot. We hope you'll enjoy today's program. It will be available in replay mode in about an hour after we close out. If you don't get the email, you can always go to amvestcapital.com/webinars, go to the replays, and it'll be there really forever. Feel free to chat in your questions in the question pane of the GoToWebinar control panel, or you can email them in, but this forum is specifically for solicited questions from the outside world. So let us have it. Amvest Capital is a New York-based specialist investment management and corporate finance firm focused on the natural resource sector. Everything has a disclaimer. This call is certainly for informational purposes only and is not an offer to buy or sell securities or any of that good stuff. Presenting today is Steve Cope, who is the president and director of Silver Viper, has about 15 years of experience in the mining sector and has worked at corporate development for Orco Silver, Barzil Minerals, Orex Minerals, Timmins Gold Corp. Always covered a wide range of areas, including financing companies, project valuation, IR, mergers and acquisitions. Again, following the presentation, Amvest will come on and throw questions at him. And if you want to full screen mode your presentation, here we are. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Campbell, and thank you everyone for taking time to hear the story either again or for the first time. It's been a very exciting / interesting last couple of weeks with a couple of assay releases that the company has put out. One in particular that was one of the best drill holes in the industry in the last 2 years. So very exciting times, and we'll jump to the story and kind of explain some of the significance of everything. I will be making some forward-looking statements today, so I would draw your attention to that slide. When you're looking to invest in a precious metals exploration company, there's really 3 things you want to be looking for. 1, that it has a high-quality asset. 2, that it has lots of potential. And 3, that it has a strong management shareholder group behind us. In our case, the asset is the La Virginia project in eastern Sonora. We're up in the Sierra Madre on the eastern boundary of the state of Sonora in Mexico with the state of Chihuahua. Our project, it was Minefinder's #1 exploration project when they were bought by Pan American Silver for $1.5 billion in 2013. What Minefinders had done was go and look for another Dolores mine, which was their flagship that sits 100 kilometers to the south. They flew the whole mountain range and settled on La Virginia being the lookalike on surface. They spent over $10 million on the project, did over 50,000 meters of drilling. At the time, they were bought by Pan American Silver. What ended up happening was after Pan American Silver bought the project, metals prices fell off a cliff. They typically don't do grassroots exploration themselves anyways, and what they did was turn back the internal claims where all the work was done, sit on a large surrounding land package, and their plan was to wait out the stakeholders that own those internal claims that Minefinders had optioned the project from, and they thought that they would end up dropping those claims. Pan Am would be able to come back in and restake them and not have to make the back end, bigger option payments that were owed. You fast forward to 2018, and that internal group approached us with the situation. They said, here, you guys have a good relationship with Pan American. They don't want to pick up the phone for us. Is this something, you'd be interested in looking at and trying to bring the whole thing back together? So we signed a CA with Pan American Silver, got access to the full database, saw that, the results were very good all the way up to hole 188. They're only the first 50 holes of 108 holes that were drilled had been made public at the time of the transaction. But we saw that the results kept looking good in the historic area. But what really got us excited was the fact that most of the project hadn't been mapped or sampled. All the work was focused on one very small portion of a massive land package, and we knew that we would be able to get involved and make potentially a number of additional discoveries on the project. When we did our site visit, we could see the same structures that run on surface through the historic area of the project run for tens of kilometers on a kind of a north-south trend and outcrop as these large silicified dikes. And then when we looked at the database, we could see most of the dikes hadn't been sampled in the northern half of the project. So we got involved. We were able to bring the project back together, and then started a first phase of drilling. Most of the first phase was focused around the historic area, filling in some gaps that we saw in their drilling. But towards the end of that program, we put 5 reconnaissance holes into a target called El Rubi, and El Rubi became a great discovery. It's where the bulk of our work has been focused since then. It's where the spectacular results you saw in hole 289 came from last week, and holes 290 and 291 this week. But I mean, that hole 289 really shows what our El Rubi model has developed into, and that's both showing the potential for open pit heap leach rock. Higher up in the hole, we saw 130 meters of almost 1 gram gold equivalent rock. And then deeper in, and in our main El Rubi structure, we saw 19 meters of high-grade mineralization, including the single highest assay that we've seen on 1/2 meter portion of it that ran 738 grams gold, over 10,600 grams silver, and almost 14% combined lead zinc. And that's certainly an outlier as far as those spectacular grades. I think there's only one other assay in the industry that I've seen that has been that high as a single sample. There may be others, but that I've seen. But what was more important to us was it was in a 19.3 meter wide high grade zone. It was the deepest and widest intercept to date that we've had on the El Rubi structure. We've since gone deeper with hole 290, which sits another 50 meters to the south and about 20 or 30 meters deeper. So the zone continues to expand both along strike and at depth. And so, like I say, it's a high quality asset. There's not a lot of high quality assets out there that have exposure to silver, and we certainly are at the top of a lot of people's lists. As far as potential, we are working towards defining a maiden resource on the project. We expect to have those numbers out by the end of the month. And right now the ball is in the court of our independent. We've sent off all of our final wireframes. All the data was cut off as of the results that you saw this week. And further to the potential idea is that we have a number of new anomalies on the project that have been identified late last year or previously through our geochem program, and those will be tested during this year's program, which is ongoing at the moment. Strong management shareholder group. The benefit for us is we're part of a group called the Belcara Management Group. We have 3 public companies under our management at the moment. That allows us to have, the experienced geological team that we have, combined over 150 years experience in the field. They've worked for the producers, they've worked for juniors, they've worked in most countries around the world. Because of that geological team, we get the respect of the major miners. We've had partnerships with Hecla, Pan American multiple times, Agnico Eagle, Fresnillo, Coeur Mining, First Majestic. Our last company that we sold was Orco Silver, and I was in a bidding war between First Majestic and Coeur, with Coeur ultimately winning out. And that company actually shows our model to a T. That project within Orco was called La Preciosa. We put the first drill hole into that project, grew it to 270 million ounces of silver, and then ultimately sold it in a bidding war between Coeur and First Majestic for over 350 million US. Our group's model is to take something somewhere along the exploration timeline. We'll take something as far as a feasibility study, but then look to vend it off to one of the producing mining companies. We only get involved with projects that we believe have the size that would interest the majors. So for us, that threshold is 1 million ounces of gold equivalent or 100 million ounces of silver equivalent. And then our shareholders benefit, and we use that transition to one of those producing companies as a liquidity event that everyone looks forward to, and that's our model. And we've garnered a lot of respect and investment from the funds that respect our model and see our track record of success. Very low share count in this company, only 81 million shares. This company was set up as a true IPO at the end of 2017. We've only done 2 financings post IPO. The last one was completed in June of last year for just over $5 million. I mentioned the claims. So you can see the claims in blue were the internal claims where all of the historic work was done. The bulk of the historic resource will come from Las Huatas and Virginia, and a little bit from the La Virginia area. All of or the majority of our work has been focused up in that El Rubi area and some of those surrounding anomalies, Macho Libre, El Molino, Ruby North. We say we're active right now. We're drilling on El Rubi. The rig has just mobilized back to the same section that hole 289, that spectacular hole, came from, and we're going to be punching holes in, scissor holes back at that section, expanding it both above and below that intercept by, our first 2 holes will be about 50 meters to either side of that intercept that we hit deep in that hole. You can see the option agreement here. The option agreement you see is on the claims that are in blue. Heavily back-end loaded option agreement. Of note that final payment, half of that can be paid in shares. Based on what we've found, I think we've certainly more than warranted those payments, but we have till June 2023 to make those decisions. We own everything in red 100%. That we gave Pan American a 2% NSR for all of their surrounding claims, as well as all the physical core and the entire database that we inherited. So very good deal for us to get involved. Again, very low cost deal, and the bulk of the money, and it was designed that way so the bulk of the money could go in the ground in the drill rigs where it belongs. There are some old underground workings in that historic area. You can see a couple pictures from a few of them here. The one in the top left is in the La Virginia. It's a narrower high grade vein. The one with the rock hammer is about a 20-meter wide vein in Con, Virginia, and you can see the stockwork veining in that area. As we move north and at El Rubi, we still have the stockwork veining, but what really becomes important at El Rubi is the breccia zones that we're in. There's a lot more, it looks like there's a lot more different mineralizing phases up in the El Rubi area. We have the stockwork veining, and that can be mineralized, but we also get these breccia zones that are vertical that run the highest grades, and within a lot of those breccia zones we see breccias that have come from deeper. They've got smoke banded quartz associated with them, and then we see other stages of mineralization. It's really, as we move north on the project, we seem to be entering a higher heat environment and seeing much more different mineral phases in our core. You can see that core that we referenced that we got from Pan American. That's all 188 holes of the historic core stored in a warehouse in Hermosillo. We have access to all the old pulps. Our independent had us do a couple of check samples, but he's very comfortable with all the QA/QC. So all of that data can be used in this Maiden resource. As I mentioned, El Rubi is certainly our focus. One of the reasons we've been able to get into El Rubi, where Mine Finders and Pan American didn't, was the use of the MAM portable drill rigs. When they were exploring on the project, they were using large track-mounted rigs. They were bulldozing in roads. With the MAM portable rigs, we're environmentally permitted to work across the entire project. Once we get into El Rubi, the guys move the rig by hand. We reuse all the lumber. When we're done drilling a pad, we throw some seed down, and within a couple of weeks, other than the drill collar, you can't tell that we were ever even drilling there. For Seminat in Mexico loves us for that. Not that there's any environmental issues in the area here. This is very mining friendly country, and there's nothing in the area, but it's very easy to permit and continue work and not have some of the delays you can have in other parts of Mexico. El Rubi is also very interesting because topography wise, it's very different than the rest of the project. That picture is taken right at the start of El Rubi, but El Rubi itself is a 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer mostly flat plateau, so much more favorable for open pit mining versus the steeper parts of the project where the historic drilling was done. What I would envision is El Rubi starting as an open pit and then going underground in the high grade structures afterwards. I won't spend too much time on this slide. Obviously, there's some very flashy high grades that represent our main El Rubi structure. But what we also get that is equally or even more important is the broad halos that either exist independently or around our high grade hits. You can see one of them reflected down there in the one that was from Toll 289, the 130 meters of 0.69 gold and 18 silver for a 0.95 gold equivalent. That is perfect heap leaching rock. And when we're talking about heap leaching, for those that would say that's low grade, the average open pit heap leach mine in Sonora operates at about an average grade of a 0.5 gram gold. They use cutoffs down as low as 0.1 or even lower. And because of the method of mining and how cheap it is, they were making money at 1,200 gold. So with the recent moves up over the last year in gold prices, these are highly profitable mines, and it's what the state, frankly, is known for. So the fact that we have this very nice, broad, low-grade zones, oftentimes over 100 meters wide, both in the main El Ruby structure as halos, but also in a new discovery that we made late last year. That was a discovery that was made through hole 245 that showed this brand new lode that sits 100 meters to the west of the main El Ruby structure. We've since followed up on that. A hole that was lost in last week's press release because everyone was focused on hole 289 was hole 284, which again, right from surface, hit this very nice, broad, long, low-grade mineralization. You can see a section here that's the section that contained hole 245. Again, you can really start to envision what an open pit would look like in that area. And for scale, those are 100-meter wide boxes. So you're looking right now at about, potentially a 300-meter deep pit, widths of almost 300 meters wide at least, and potential again for all of that to continue to grow. But you can see that it is hanging together very well throughout this El Ruby set area. This is some core from that hole 245, actually. Again, very similar of the core in the main El Ruby structure. You can see the breccias, you can see some stockwork veining, and you can see the grades are pretty consistent throughout. Down here in the bottom, we got a picture from that juicy bit of, the half meter that ran the spectacular grade from the release last week. And again, you can see some of the geological structure in the area. We won't spend too much time on this, but again, it all bodes well and shows, additional potential. This section that we're talking about here is from the section with hole 289. What happened here, this hole was drilled because we had identified a gap in our wireframes from our drilling at the end of last year. So hole 289 was the first hole that was drilled in January of this year. And what we've encountered here is that as we've moved south on Ruby, it seems to be a down drop block. You can see in the middle, we still have that high grade, that broad low grade. We still have some high grade kickers higher up that are part of the western zone and the stringer structures. But as we came through the rhyolite here and then back into the andesites, we hit another 130 meters of that broad low grade mineralization. And then independently of that, we hit the 19.3 meters of 363 silver and 21.2 that had the 1/2 meter that was extremely high grade. But this is that main El Ruby structure. You can see these structures are vertical, how they line up, but this is a down drop block. So there's been a shift in this area, and it's really opened up a lot of the potential for, the drilling moving forward and exploring that southern section, now understanding that this is a down drop block and we can target it a bit differently. One thing to note is people say, you're looking at surface and how deep it is from surface, but also as we move south, we're coming off the plateau. So if you're looking at an open pit on the El Ruby area, you're not going to have a pit wall on the southern side, which is as we're coming down the hill and these holes are being drilled off the plateau heading down the hill towards the arroyo. So again, while you're a long ways away from surface, which again 300 meters isn't that far when you compare it to other mines, but you're not going to have that same strip as you move south and come in and don't have a pit wall on that side. You're closer to surface here as you move south on the deposit. And again, you can see some core from that hole 289. Not much difference visually in what was in the the 1/2 meter that ran the spectacular grade in, but again, you can see some pretty nice high grades around it as well, but just a very consistent breccia zone. We actually don't have that much stockwork veining in this particular, there's some, but in this particular zone, it's mostly all carried within the breccias. So it's not a traditional vein. This is a breccia structure that runs vertical and is mineralized. We did some geophysics work on the project as well last year, and again, you can see our geochem really lined up right on the periphery of this large arrowhead shaped structure that you see in the geophysics. What our geologists interpreting as, and then they're confident, is that is a buried intrusion in the area, definitely a source of some of the plumbing. Very interesting that we line up, and again, it speaks to the potential with all these different targets sitting, on the boundary of that structure. We have another one of these to the northeast, and this Alacomena anomaly was actually just recently identified a couple weeks ago with some surface sampling, and we're following up to get that to become a drill ready target that we'll be testing early in phase 3 here, but hit high grade gold and silver at surface. So we're very interested in this Alacomena anomaly as well. Our 2021 exploration programs, we'll drill all year long with our phase 3 program. We're going to wait now. We're continuing drilling, but we're going to wait now for the resource, and then on the back end of that, I would expect to add, potentially at least 1 or 2 more rigs to the project. But last year we did over 20,000 meters of drilling. We announced that as a 5,000 meter program. Same thing this year. Based on success, we'll continue to drill and as warranted, ramp up and expand the drill program. The LiDAR survey is expected to be done this week. I believe they said the 17th they'd be flying that. That's very important, another layer of information we've been waiting on a long time on the project, that just to go with the geochem and the geophysics. We continue to map and sample the very large land package, trying to identify additional anomalies that we will do some reconnaissance testing on. And as I already said, we'll be following up on the anomalies we've already identified. Another major check mark that you need to have on any project is, you know, the ability to recover the gold and silver. And we did our preliminary metallurgical work last year. The first step was sending samples off to the lab, or the university's lab in Hermosillo. What we saw there was, you know, acanthite was our host mineralization with gold and silver alloyed as electrum, very typical of low sulfidation epithermal systems in Mexico. And we knew on that we weren't going to have any problems. We were actually pleasantly surprised with how high grade a lot of our first pass at metallurgy was, just with simple bottle roll tests, 90 to 95% recoveries on gold across all the grade ranges, and silver leaching very well at 62 to 76%. Right now, we're currently doing some additional network to show how you would recover the high grade silver in a secondary circuit, you know, that kind of kilogram plus material. And we'd like to see those numbers get up around that 90% range or higher with the high grade silver recoveries, which again is very typical, you know, high 80s to low 90s on these types of deposits. So we're not expecting any problems there. I mentioned the Belcara group. We have two other companies under our management within the group: Barceli Minerals, which is a joint venture with Agnico Eagle in Sweden, and Orex Minerals, which has a joint venture with Fresnillo and Pan American Silver in Durango, Mexico. We talked about Orco Silver, and again, this is a group that has a long track record of success, exploring, making discoveries, selling projects. Orco is obviously the most recent one, but we've had a lot of success in all three companies, exploring around the world, and you know, that's our model, and people continue to invest in us because they respect our model. A little bit of the share structure here. You can see, you know, for a company our size, we've had an incredibly strong institutional holding. You know, the funds that get involved with us at very early stages. They know our group from deal to deal. You know, you can see some of the, you know, absolute power funds in our industry that have been around for a long time and understand, you know, they're all long hold investors in our space. US Global out of San Antonio, Ingalls and Snyder out of New York, Sprott Asset Management, that's the silver fund in Toronto, Donald Smith and Company out of New York, Contrarian Group out of Newport Beach. They've been a very supportive shareholders, and Commodity Capital out of Europe. There's about 20 funds as of the last financing that own the stock. You know, they're positioned all over the world. And then recently we've been really focusing on a lot of retail investment into the stock and trying to get our story out there, get in front of as many people as possible. And we've really seen kind of the volume on our stock increase on that. We've certainly had more retail eyes than ever before. You know, the results we're putting out obviously help on that front, but it's a growing story. I think the share price is quite undervalued now based on the results that we put out. We're waiting on the catalyst of the upcoming resource, but I fully expect that to be a mover of the share price. I think based on the results that we just put out, the share price should be a lot higher, as I said. And what we've seen is, I think some certain people who got in on the financing, potentially, you know, a hedge fund or something along those lines, has been playing some games with the stock and purposely holding it down. I know it's something kind of unavoidable in our space, but it's very undervalued compared to what we've seen, compared to what our peer groups, you know, are trading at based on the success they've had. I think this is a great opportunity for people to step in, build a position in the stock. There seems to be liquidity there around these prices, so I think it is easy to build a position. I would love for the few sellers that we've had since the back end of the financing to be taken out so the stock can start trading normally again and move up to the levels that we all believe it should be trading at. With that, I mean, I'll summarize. We've got a high quality asset, mining friendly jurisdiction. Sonora is the #1 gold producing state in Mexico and high up on the list in silver, kind of third, fourth given the year. Strong management and technical team behind it, lots of potential, strong shareholder support, and a healthy treasury. With that, I think we can open it up for questions, and I'd like to thank everyone for the time.
Thank you, Steve. How much do the deep holes at El Ruby cost to drill? So, just what's your average drilling cost per meter?
Yeah, we're about 150 US per meter.
Is that a lot? How's
No,
that compare?
I mean, it depends where you work in the world. It's pretty cheap, I think, relative to other experiences around the world. I mean, we worked up and we had a project up in BC in another company in Canada, and that when we took over that project, the exploration costs were over 600. We lowered them to about 350, 360 a meter. With our experience in Sweden's around 200 US, a meter.
Mm-hmm.
You might be able to go a little cheaper at times, and if that's pretty cheap though when it comes to diamond drilling in our sector. I mean, some guys do RC drilling, which can lower the cost a bit, but you're not getting anywhere near as much information out of that core as you do with diamond drilling.
Will your latest drill results be included in the Maiden resource as per end of this month? And will you follow up with a financial study?
I don't think we won't be at the level of doing an economic study yet after this Maiden resource. Yes, the results that have been announced today will all be included in the resource. Those holes were drilled purposely to expand the wireframes, and that's partly why our resource isn't already out, as we saw that hole at the end of last year with the wireframes, knew we had to expand that southern portion. So holes 290 and 291 are the cutoff for the resource. All of that data has been included and gone into the wireframes, and now it is off to the independent. So that was the cutoff for the data.
How much cash do you have? How long will it last? And will you need to raise more money this year? Yeah. You're a junior, you're always raising money.
That's definitely the model for explorers. You keep going, you expand, you hope, if the model's working right, every financing is done at a higher price, which so far has been the case, and where we're trading now certainly will be the case on the next one. I think there will be a financing at some point. I don't know what avenue we will go on that financing, whether it's the route we've already been going on with traditional private placement routes, whether it will be a strategic with one of the mining companies or a large strategic with some of the bigger names that people have speculated on for some time that would be taking an investment in our company. I think we have some options available to us. We'll monitor what that looks like, but I would expect to do some form of a financing after the resource, maybe not immediately, but some point after. We're certainly covered for our drilling, probably through Q2 at least, with the rigs we have on it right now. You don't want to wait too long, but there definitely will be a financing at some point.
Everyone always asks, what's your goal? To JV, sell, or build?
Our goal is definitely to ultimately sell. We've seen far too many companies in our space get greedy, and say, oh, well, we can take this further, we can take it to production, but they forget that, their expertise is in exploring and not in mine building. It's a very different approach. We have, like I said, 150 years experience in the industry, but as exploration geologists, they're not mining engineers. They've worked at mines, they've worked around mines. They probably have a better understanding than most geologists about building a mine, but we've seen too many companies struggle with that transition from becoming an explorer to building and operating a mine. Their shareholders suffer for it oftentimes for years as they try and optimize and get the mine up and running. For us, it's that liquidity event of selling to one of the mining companies that is where our shareholders gain the most.
Gotcha. Back to the resource. Are you going to leave some parts of relatively deep zones out of the estimation? Would you?
We will see, but I believe it'll go down. I mean, I think our depth, the resource will go down 300 meters. Plus, I mean, like I said, that data that was in there will certainly be included within the resource. We remain open at depth and will continue to expand and grow it at depth on the back end of the resource. But I think all of what's been found so far will be included in the resource.
Cutoff grade for the Maiden resource, have you established that yet? What is it?
That is not established yet. Again, I know we're focusing on the open pit component to El Ruby and trying to bring in as many ounces as possible. And like I said, the mines that operate in that area, even at using 1200 gold, we're making money using, half gram average grade cutoffs of 0.1 or lower, gold. So I would fully expect our independent to at least operate within those parameters when looking at the open pit potential of El Ruby. You know, there would be other structures where you can open pit that'll be using different cutoff grades, and I can't speak to what those will be yet. But again, you can kind of look at Mexico and what other companies have done that are both underground or an open pit and get a pretty good idea of at a minimum what our cutoffs will be.
Here's an interesting question. Have you investigated the geological controls on mineralization? What are those and how complex is it? And for the larger benefit, what does it mean by geological controls on mineralization?
Yeah, for me, I would interpret that as the structures and what controls kind of when mineralization happened, as far as, you know, when these fluids came up and mineralized the area. That for us, our main El Ruby structure is this breccia structure. Our mineralization tends to happen adjacent to these dikes, oftentimes on both sides of the dike and even into the dike. And then we have the large regional fault that runs right through the heart of the deposit, north-south, that runs a very long time. That's the main kind of controlling structure on the project, and all of these dike structures run parallel to that fault, mostly on the eastern side of that major fault. Within, like I said, we have a stockwork veining that's part of the mineralization that comes through those breccia structures. But that breccia structure itself, the andesite tends to be the favorable host rock, even though we get mineralization into the rhyolites below that as well. The andesite tends to be more brittle and allow for that broader, wider, higher grade mineralization. But yeah, I mean, it's between the dikes, between the regional fault, you know, it's hosted in andesite. I think somewhere in that is the answer to that question.
If I took a wander on your property next week, would I hear the sound of drilling? How much sound would I hear?
If you walk out to
how many geologists would I see walking around?
You would see, you know, 6 or so geologists at minimum, depending on who's in site or who's on their break. We've got one rig turning at the moment, and it is focused on El Ruby. So if you happen to walk out to that portion of the project, you're definitely going to hear that rig and see that rig turning. Like I said, we'll add rigs on the back end of the resource, but for the time being, that rig is continuing to expand El Ruby. And then we'll add another rig on the back end of that'll start testing anomalies, and maybe another rig on Ruby as well. But we'll see what that looks like at the time. But, you know, very active camp. We actually just did a site, or there's an ongoing site visit this week. It's certainly garnered a lot of interest from the majors, and it's, you know, it's progressing very quickly and become a very interesting project within our space.
I'm hoping to never have to ask this question much longer. Regarding COVID, I mean, can you go there? Do you go down to Mexico regularly? What can you update us on your ability to go there? And let's say not going or not so much, have you been able to run the operation from your library in Vancouver?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I have not been to site since COVID started. I was obviously there lots before that. They don't need me on site to run the drill program though. Dale oversees the program. He has been down to site since COVID started. He would have been back on site. Actually, we have had a delay here at the start of this year with some travel restrictions that the Canadian government put on, but those, I believe, are loosening, and we've looked, and there'll be flights, more regular flights moving forward here in about a month. So that'll change, and Dale will be going back down the site. The headache coming home for anyone that's based in Canada, obviously, is our government has required us to quarantine for 2 weeks, and Dale, you know, to his credit, with his family, has been willing to do that when he's come back and forth from site. He understands how important it is that he's on site, but we also understand that we have a very strong geological team in Mexico that are all based in Mexico. They're Mexican nationals. You know, our project manager, Jose Luis, has done a great job running the program when Dale hasn't been there. We've got a very, you know, capable and strong junior geological team that's supporting and on site. And so we've been able to operate all the way through COVID, other than the mandatory pause that Mexico put on kind of when the outbreak really started there. But we resumed drilling in June of last year and have been drilling steadily since, other than the pause for Christmas break. The only headache for us, we changed a bunch of stuff in camp. We spread out tents. We started staggering meal times. We go through very strict protocol of quarantining in Hermosillo in a hotel before the guys have to go directly to site from that hotel after they pass their quarantine period. We've been very lucky, weather, and are also done a very good job. And I'll knock on wood as I say this, but we haven't had a single case of COVID yet with any of our crew. So our program has been working properly, and our drilling company and their employees are operating under the exact same protocols, and the same has gone for them. Like I said, everything has been going fine. The only thing that's really created a slowdown has been the assay labs. The assay labs and the crews that they've been running during COVID has certainly made results, and I think anyone who's investing in this space can relate to it because they've seen it across most of the companies, or all the companies in the industry, that assays have gone from, in our case, 2 to 3 week turnaround times to 2 to 3 months minimum under COVID. It seems to have sped up a little bit at the start of this year, and hopefully it continues to trend back towards normal, because that can be frustrating when you're basically you're drilling off visuals and trying to plan your program 2 to 3 months behind assays. But we have tools on site that tell us if core is mineralized. We use XRF guns. We have obviously our eyes, and the structures are very noticeable. So we've continued to work. We've obviously had a lot of success drilling in spite of the slowdowns with the assay lab, but let's hope it gets back to normal soon.
CA signed. Do you have to meet potential strategic partners off your property?
There are
what kind of interest are you feeling? What kind of love are you feeling from?
I think things have really picked up recently. I think, and you're starting to see it on a daily basis in our space too. I mean, there's so much pressure on those mining companies to start to get aggressive on an M&A front. Their pipelines are mostly dry. There's pressure from their shareholders to show where their next mines. They're pressure to increase their production profiles. And even before we put out the results from the last couple of weeks, we had multiple producers under CA. The other side of that obviously has been COVID, and that's, I guess, the other hiccup of COVID is it's made doing site visits very difficult through most of this. The big producing companies, weren't wanting to send their people to other areas. It was essential activities only. But we've seen that change here in the last month or so, and as pressure is built and people are becoming more and more comfortable, I guess, with where we're at with COVID. Like I said, we have an ongoing site visit right now. We've had other companies approach us on the back end of the news release, asking for more information. There's not a lot of quality exposure, especially on the silver side out in the market. And with those types of results, with the results we already put out, we're in a very short list in a very favorable mining jurisdiction. And it wouldn't shock me to see it get really heated on the M&A front, and us be front and center on that moving forward through this year.
Right on. I'm going to pass it over to Artie, who is a graduate level mining engineer. Perhaps he can get at you.
Thank you. Steve, within the current knowledge, when we look at the geometry of the El Ruby structure, have you tested the footfall? Is there any mineralization there, and is there any potential for the extension?
Yeah, I mean, the footwall mineralization, and Dale can answer this and go in much further into detail, but the footwall is actually that low-grade broad mineralization is happening in the footwall on the western side of the main El Ruby structure. So yeah, we've been testing that and growing that and trying to further exploration on that front, but there's lots of potential in that footwall.
And do you think this maiden resource estimation is gonna be mostly the inferred?
Yes, yeah, there could be some indicated, but yeah, I mean, we've drilled it basically at 50-meter spacings, targeting that around inferred, but it will have. What I would always remind people now that have been investing in the space is that the way resources are being calculated now has dramatically changed, even in the last few years, never mind, 10 years, but the 43101 standards have gotten stricter and stricter and stricter by the year. And now, where inferred used to be something that people ignored, now inferred has mining parameters put on it. It's very strict. And so don't treat inferred now like you would have 10 years ago. There's a high level of confidence in what you have, at least in the resource, I should say, through our experience. I don't know what other companies are doing, but from our experience across our companies, inferred has come a long ways. And so yes, most of this will be inferred, but these are going to be ounces that we have a lot of confidence in.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it's gonna be like a one main body, or there are gonna be a couple different bodies?
It'll depend on the zone, because this is the maiden resource on the historic portion of the project too. So you'll have Las Huatas, Con Virginia, La Virginia will be included in the historic area. The bulk of the ounces there will come from Las Huatas and then Con Virginia. As far as Ruby, we're treating this, we're looking at it, like I said, through the open pit eyes and trying to encompass everything. We have our main El Ruby structure, the stringer structures that come off of that, and then that new lode that we've called, at one point I think was the Western Stringer Zone. I don't like the word stringer with it now because it's the widest, broadest mineralization that we're seeing, but that Western zone will be encompassed in with the main El Ruby structure and the stringer structures on El Ruby. So you'll have 4 different named zones that'll be part of the resource.
Can you please give us some more explanation on this LIDAR survey? How will it help you, and are you looking for new greenfield targets?
We're always looking for new targets, and it helps. LIDAR is kind of your advanced detailed topography. The historic work ended right at the start of El Ruby on that front, frustratingly. It will line up and give you an idea on a lot of the finer surface structures and how they kind of come together. One of the things I didn't talk about during the presentation or after the presentation when the structure question came up is there's another component that we're seeing on some of these sections. We have our main north-south structure, but oftentimes we have these east-west running structures that come in on some of those sections. And oftentimes those sections in particular are where we hit the best grades even within El Ruby. So LIDAR will help identify further of those structures in that fine detail to go with the geophysics and the geochem, and kind of the combination of the 3 can vector you in on subtle changes to your main structure if it does a jog or changes direction and you don't see it you're standing there on surface. So it's just another layer of information. I know Dale has been very excited, waiting impatiently for that LIDAR survey to be completed.
Thank you. And how does your drill results vary, especially in terms of mineralogical metrics?
It's always, that's an ongoing, I guess, idea, but we're sitting, that result for that half meter with having the base metals there for the first time was very interesting on that down drop block in El Ruby. Throughout the rest of the project, or at least El Ruby in the historic area, base metals have been fairly anomalous, and to all of a sudden enter this zone that happened to be at the time the deepest intercept to date, and then to see almost 14% combined lead zinc in a sample. And the idea there is that that's starting to move us at least towards one of the feeders is probably close by in that sector, potentially, as we go deeper on that particular section. As these zones tend to work, I guess, in Mexico, you tend to have, your gold zone, and then you get into gold silver, then the gold starts to fall, or then you get into this sweet boiling point where you have, everything base metals, gold, silver, then the gold starts to fall off, then the silver will fall off, and then you're just left with base metals if you have full intact systems. So as we go deeper, we would expect the base metals to start to pick up, but I think most of where we are is high in that system. We're seeing, mostly gold, silver dominated mineralization everywhere we've been drilling.
And one more on this, especially when this high-grade silver areas, is the gold same where it presents at the lower silver grades?
Yeah, I mean, I think our average across the project is about 55% gold, 45% silver. There always seems to be both. Maybe at times it's gold dominated, but there's sections that certainly the silver is higher grade. You know, in the case of that extremely high grade sample, you know, that's even though 10,600 grams silver is obviously an incredible number, on an equivalent basis, the gold was more dominant at 738. That's, you know, an additional 40,000+, almost 50,000, probably 50,000 grams extra, you know, of silver if you're doing it on an equivalent basis. So gold is the dominant metal, but at 45% silver, that's a lot of silver exposure. And again, you know, I've talked with, you know, Maria and the fund there, and she's always expressed that at 45% silver, we've got some of the highest silver exposure in her silver fund as far as the company she's invested in.
Thank you, Steve. Campbell?
Sure. Just 2 more questions, and I think we'll wrap up, Steve. Any significant, kind of larger than life individual investors like Eric Sprott or Bill Gates or something?
We don't have Eric. I think we're one of the few silver companies, and I mean, I won't speak for Eric, or I mean, I've been told for a long time that it's high up on his list, but that's what I've been told. The timing of our 2 financings that we've done have not, you know, they just haven't been the right timing with him. When we did our first financing in September of 2019, that, I mean, he had self-financed most of the silver space before that, and again we were told he was interested, but then when we went to the market on that financing, it was done in hours. And you know, Eric typically wants, you know, the full piece of the pie or a large portion of it, and that financing we didn't want to dilute further, so you know, that one was off the table very quickly. The one we did in June, you know, Eric was, again, he wasn't in a space at that point where he was doing a lot of investments in the sector. And again, we, you know, with the support of the existing, we didn't have to, you know, push or try and go to that well. I mean, we've placed Eric in other companies of ours. We have a good relationship with Eric. But no, we don't have that single large investor like an Eric Sprott per se in there. We have some people that have some very big names in the investment space, but he's obviously been the main financer of most of the precious metal space. And we'll see moving forward. It wouldn't surprise me if we see Eric as a shareholder at some point, but you know, all the timing and stars need to be aligned to have that happen and make sense for our shareholders. I'm not just going to do a financing because someone comes and makes an offer. It's got to make sense from a dilution standpoint and the timing for our shareholders, and when the timing is right, we'll make that decision.
So that dovetails nicely into this last question, and then we'll close. So what can you commit regarding timelines? When would you expect to have the project drilled out to an extent you'd entertain offers for the project or the company? So that's what we're all, you know, looking for. End game.
Yeah. I mean, I will.
So, and then with that, you know, why buy now? Because this timeline is ticking. So.
Yeah, my timeline as far as that, I mean, I'm always open to offers. If someone makes an offer that we can't refuse, and we think it makes the most sense for our shareholders, we would entertain that today. We'll continue to drill and expand the deposit. I can't put a timeline on how long it takes because I don't know how big it is yet. We're going to continue to expand Ruby until we hit the parameters. We're going to continue to explore other anomalies until we hit boundaries on them, and hopefully make new discoveries and delineate them. It's up to the producers to come in and step in and make the choice when they're comfortable enough that we have enough and have shown enough potential that they want to buy it. And I can see that happening in the near term based on the pressure on those silver producers. So I think people that are investing today, one, you're going to get exposure very quickly to a maiden resource as a major catalyst. And I think I certainly, when I see the resources that some of our peers have and where they're trading, I'm fully expecting that to be a positive catalyst for the company. And then also moving forward, I think, you know, even within this year, this should be at the top of a lot of those silver and gold companies lists as far as something that they can put in their pipeline and quickly expand and take it to production. So there's lots of potential. I think, again, that based on where we're trading, it's, I think it's, if you're interested in junior explorers, you'd be crazy not to be investing in this one right now.
Crazy unless you invest. So I like that. We'll leave it there. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and please share your feedback when you're queued for it. Really helpful. Anything that's on your mind, it'll make it to Steve in largely unadulterated form, and you can attest. The replay will be available at amvestcapital.com/webinars in about an hour, on demand for all eternity. So with that, good day everyone, and thank you, Steve and Artie.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone for taking time, and yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Right on.